Do you know the feeling when the society photographer's flashes are not on you, but on the necklace on your husband's mistress, the one that was supposed to be yours that night? The cold November air in New York couldn't compare to the ice in my chest. And him. He didn't know he just attended his last party as a powerful man. He thought he was playing chess, but he could not even see the board. And I was the one who created the game. My name is Ilara Vance, and for the past 12 years, I have been the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, and the perfect silent partner in the Vance family legacy. Tonight, I was the co-chair of the Golden Hearts Gala. The air in the museum's grand hall was thick, suffocating on the scent of overpriced perfume and wilted lilies. It was the pinnacle of the New York social season, a glittering facade where everyone smiled and no one meant it. I, at 38 years old, was a master of this performance. My gown was silk, the color of champagne, and my smile was just as bubbly and just as fake. I had been standing near the entrance for an hour, greeting senators and tech billionaires, all while a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Julian was late. Of course, Julian was late. Punctuality is for people who need to make an impression. Julian Vance, CEO of Aurelian Capital, believed he was the only impression that mattered. When he finally arrived, the press lights intensified, a feeding frenzy of flashes. But he was not alone. She was latched onto his arm, a stark contrast to the old money elegance of the room. She was young, perhaps 10 years younger than me, poured into a red dress that screamed for attention. I knew who she was. Camilla Russo. The whispers had called her a rising brand strategist. Looking at her now, I saw exactly what kind of brand she was strategizing. Julian, slick and handsome in his custom tuxedo, beamed with the self-satisfaction of a man who believes he is untouchable. Then I saw it, resting against her collarbone, glittering with a sickening fire under the chandeliers, was Le Diamant Soleil, the sun diamond, a cascade of antique yellow diamonds, a Vance heirloom passed down for 3 generations. It was the necklace I had specifically requested from the vault for tonight. "It's being cleaned, darling," Julian had told me just 2 days ago, not even looking up from his phone. Routine maintenance. Routine maintenance was now breathing heavily on my husband's arm. My own throat felt tight, my modest sapphires suddenly feeling like pebbles. The blood drained from my face, but years of training kept the smile cemented in place. I watched them move through the crowd. I saw the eyes of the board members. I saw Beatrice DuPont, my social rival, cover her mouth with her glove, her eyes wide with malicious delight. They saw it. They all saw it. This was not a mistake. It was not a lapse in judgment. It was a declaration, a public execution of my role as his wife. Julian, with all the audacity of a king, finally navigated his way to me, his prize in tow. He leaned in, the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with her cheap, fruity perfume. He kissed the air beside my cheek. "Be professional, Ilara," he whispered, his voice cold and flat. "This is the future of the company." He had just publicly demoted me from wife to employee, and a low-level one at that. The cameras turned to us, capturing the image of the happy couple. I felt the heat of the lights. I turned my head, my perfect smile flashing for them. I reached out and took my husband's hand, lacing my fingers with his. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice dripping with practiced adoration. "You know I always support the family." Julian squeezed my hand, a gesture of ownership, of victory. He turned to introduce his mistress to the mayor, and in that instant, the cameras swung away. I dropped his hand as if it were contaminated. My eyes found hers. Camilla Russo. She had been watching me with a mixture of pity and triumph. I held her gaze. I did not glare. I did not frown. I simply looked at her, a calm, steady, assessing stare. I saw the bravado in her eyes flicker, replaced by a sudden, primal uncertainty. She was the first to look away, turning back to Julian with a nervous flutter. A few minutes later, it was time for my opening remarks as co-chair. I walked to the podium, the spotlight following me. The room fell silent. I adjusted the microphone. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, searching for a crack, for a tear, for a tremor in my hand. I looked out into the crowd, my gaze sweeping past the donors and the politicians until it landed directly on my husband. He was staring at his phone, already bored. Welcome everyone to the Golden Hearts Gala. I began. My voice was perfect, clear, strong, and unwavering. Tonight, we are here to celebrate things that endure. We are here to honor legacy. Julian looked up, a slight frown touching his brow. In our fast-paced world, I continued, it is easy to get distracted by things that are new and shiny, but what truly matters, what builds empires and sustains them, is not flash. It is loyalty. I saw his jaw tighten. It is about honoring the foundations we are built upon. It is about lasting values. I smiled, the same perfect champagne smile. Thank you for supporting a cause that understands the difference between a fleeting trend and a permanent commitment. I raised my glass to the room, but my eyes never left his. He knew exactly what I had said, but he had no idea what I was about to do. I held that applause for exactly 10 seconds before stepping down from the podium. I didn't look at Julian. I walked straight past the head table, past the governor, and through the velvet-roped exit toward the private lounges. The first door I found was the ladies' powder room, an opulent cavern of marble and gold fixtures. It was empty. The muffled sounds of the orchestra were a distant hum. I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman looking back at me was pale, but her eyes were not panicked. They were clear. They were assessing. The champagne-colored dress was still perfect. The sapphires were still quiet. I braced my hands on the cool marble sink and took one deep, steadying breath. The narrative they all believed, the one Julian told himself, was that he was a self-made titan. It was a lie. Julian Vance never built anything. He inherited it. Aurelian Capital was the brainchild of his father, Theodore Vance. Theodore was a brilliant, cold, and utterly ruthless man who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. He loved his son, I suppose, but he did not trust him. He saw Julian's recklessness, his hunger for applause over profit, his fundamental weakness. When I married Julian 12 years ago, Theodore didn't see me as a daughter-in-law. He saw me as an ally. He saw the girl from a modest background who had fought her way into Vassar and then Columbia Law. He saw the quiet observer, the one who read the fine print. My son, Theodore told me over brandy one night, his voice like gravel, wants to be the king. He never wants to do the work of governing. Theodore died 5 years ago. His death was the beginning of this countdown. He left behind a will so complex it had taken a team of lawyers 6 months to fully parse. The bulk of the Vance fortune, the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and most importantly, the controlling 51% stake in Aurelian Capital, was not left to Julian. It was all placed into the Vance family trust. Julian, in his arrogance, assumed this was just a formality, a tax dodge. He believed he was the sole beneficiary, and that I, his dutiful wife, was some sort of interim administrator. He believed that upon the 5th anniversary of his father's death, which is next week, I would sign a few routine papers. The trust would dissolve, and everything would transfer directly to him. He was so confident in this that he never even read the full trust document himself. He let his own lawyer, a man half as clever as he thought he was, give him the summary. Here is what the summary missed. I am not an administrator. I am the sole trustee. That means for the past 5 years, I have held the full voting power of that 51% stake. I have been the silent majority. I have been the one approving balance sheets, and I have been the one watching. Theodore was clever. He protected his legacy. The trust document contained a secret codicil, a provision so precise it was a work of art. My control as trustee was absolute. With one condition, it lasted only so long as she remains in a faithful marriage to my son. This was the clause Julian knew about, or at least thought he knew. He assumed it meant that if I ever divorced him, I would lose everything. He thought it was his shield, the thing that kept me trapped. But Theodore Vance always included a failsafe, tucked away in Article 7. Section B was a subclause, a clause that even Julian's lawyer missed. It stated that if Julian himself were to commit an act of flagrant infidelity or public malfeasance that brings demonstrable harm to the family name, the condition of marriage was voided, and the 51% stake, it would not go to Julian, it would not be split, it would vest permanently, irrevocably, and immediately with me, the trustee. Whether I chose to stay married to him or not, Julian thought tonight was his declaration of independence. He thought he was shaming me into submission, forcing my hand to sign over his inheritance so he could be free with his new woman. I looked at my reflection. The ice in my chest was not from shock. It was from clarity. He had just walked onto the most public stage in New York City, with every major newspaper and social blog documenting his every move. He had taken a priceless family heirloom and draped it around the neck of his mistress. He had not just been unfaithful. He had done it publicly. He had brought demonstrable harm to the Vance name in front of the entire financial and social elite. Tonight was not my humiliation. It was my evidence. Julian Vance had just handed me the keys to his entire kingdom. He just did not know it yet. We left the gala separately. It was the only concession to propriety Julian was willing to make. He put Camilla in a separate car service, likely already waiting for him at the penthouse, before sliding into the back of our Maybach. The door shut with a heavy, soundproof thud, encasing us in a bubble of thick, suffocating silence. The drive up Park Avenue was a blur of streetlights streaking across the tinted windows. The only sound in the cavernous back seat was the faint, incessant tap-tap-tap of Julian's thumb on his phone screen. I glanced over. He was not texting. He was reading. A small, self-satisfied smile played on his lips. I knew exactly what he was looking at. The early gossip blogs. Julian Vance debuts, stunning new associate Camila Russo, or Vance Harris necklace, Grace's newcomer at Golden Heart's Gala. He was admiring his own handiwork, reveling in the disruption he had caused. He was a child who had set a fire and was now basking in its glow, ignorant of the fact that he was standing in the living room. That necklace looked ridiculous on her, I said. My voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. He did not even look up. His smile only widened. It's called marketing, Ilara. Camilla is an asset. She's young. She's exciting. She makes the brand look vibrant, not stuffy. You should try to get used to it. Get used to what? Julian. I kept my tone level, my hands folded perfectly in my lap. The adultery, or the public theft of family property, that finally made him look up. The smugness vanished, replaced by a flash of irritation. This was the part of the evening he clearly did not want to deal with the messy human emotion. I am tired, he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose as if I were a migraine. So incredibly tired of tiptoeing around you. Things have changed. I am changing. Aurelian is changing. I need someone who supports my vision. Ilara, not someone who acts like a goddamn museum curator, polishing old silver and talking about legacy. The venom he spat on that last word was palpable. He had always hated his father, and by extension, he hated me for respecting him. So this is your vision, I asked. Embarrassing me. Embarrassing yourself with a girl who looks like she rents by the hour. This is my future, he snapped, his voice finally rising. Yes, all of it. Camilla and I have been together for 6 months. 6 months. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. 6 months of lies, of late nights at the office, of new investment dinners. 6 months of him looking at me over breakfast, knowing he was betraying me and feeling nothing but impatience. "I was going to tell you," he continued, waving his hand dismissively, as if swatting away my predictable, unvoiced reaction. "I was going to tell you next week, after the trust transfer was complete. I wanted everything to be clean." "Clean," I repeated. The word was an obscenity. Yes, clean. He reached into the briefcase at his feet, the one he always carried, the one that made him feel important. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it onto the empty seat between us. "This is a revised post-nuptial agreement. My lawyers drew it up last week." I did not move. I just looked at the folder. He mistook my stillness for shock, for defeat. "It's generous," he said, the salesman's cadence returning to his voice. He was closing the deal. "It's very generous. You get the penthouse, free and clear. You get a substantial allowance, enough to keep you in champagne-colored dresses for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign it." "Sign what? Exactly." "The post-nup and the trust papers. It's all in there, bundled together. You sign over all rights to the trust, the company, and any future claims. You walk away, and I walk away. Clean." He truly believed it. He thought he was divorcing me. He thought this was his final move, the brilliant strategic play that would free him from his museum curator wife and install his asset girlfriend. He thought he was holding all the cards, that the public humiliation tonight was just the final push I needed to sign his pathetic offer and disappear. He looked at me, expectant, waiting for the tears, the screaming, the negotiations. I slowly reached over and picked up the heavy folder. I did not open it. I ran my fingers over the embossed leather, the logo of his law firm. I turned my head and looked out the window. The city lights of New York blurred past, a river of diamonds that, for the first time in a long time, did not feel cold. They felt like armor. I turned back to him. His face was a mask of impatient confidence. "I'll have my lawyer look at it," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, so calm that it finally, for the first time that night, wiped the smirk clean off his face. It was replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the reaction he had planned for. It was not the reaction of a victim. The Maybach was quiet on the ride back, but my mind was not. Julian went straight to the master bedroom, likely texting Camilla, and was snoring within 20 minutes. He always slept deeply after what he considered a victory. I did not sleep. At 6 a.m., the city was still a bruised purple, but I was in my home office, the one Julian called my hobby room, the one where I had, for 5 years, managed the Vance family trust. My hand was steady as I dialed the first number. He picked up on the first ring. "Marcus," I said, my voice low. "Alara." I watched the news feeds. Marcus Thorne replied. His voice was the same dry, comforting rustle of old parchment it had been for 20 years. He was Theodore's lawyer, the man who had drafted the will, the man who had sat across from me and explained every single line. "He did exactly as you predicted, Marcus. He brought her. She was wearing the soleil." There was a long pause. I heard Marcus sigh, a sound of grim satisfaction. Theodore always said his son's ego would be his ruin. He just needed the right stage. "So, the clause is triggered. Are you ready?" "I am," I said. "We move." "I'll prepare the injunctions and notify the board members of an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," he said. "They won't know why until you are in the room." "Thank you, Marcus." I ended the call. The second call was to a number I had kept saved for 3 years, ever since I first suspected Julian's business trips were not just business. A private investigator, the best in the city. "This is Vance," I said. "I need everything you have on a woman named Camilla Russo. Financials, associations, travel, everything. I need it by noon." "Understood, Mrs. Vance." The third call was internal, to the penthouse's secure line. "Mrs. Davis, it is Alara." "I'm awake, madam," she replied. "Mrs. Davis had been with the Vance family for 40 years. She had been Theodore's most trusted employee, more confidant than housekeeper. She despised Julian. It's time, Mrs. Davis. The protocol Theodore arranged. "God bless you, child," she whispered. "The second set of books from the study safe. They'll be on your desk in 5 minutes." While I waited, I opened the leather folder Julian had tossed at me. His post-nuptial agreement. I read it once. It was, as I suspected, amateurish. It offered me the penthouse which I already controlled through the trust and a generous stipend of $5 million, paid out over 10 years. A laughable sum. In exchange, it demanded I sign away all rights to the Vance family trust and Aurelian capital. The document was a monument to his arrogance. It proved, beyond any doubt, that he had no idea what the trust contained. He had no idea about his father's failsafe. He thought he was negotiating from a position of power, when in fact he had no power at all. Mrs. Davis entered silently, placed a thin, gray ledger on my desk, and left. This was the document Julian truly did not know existed. It was not just the 51% of the company I controlled. It was the Family Contingency Fund, a separate offshore account Theodore had established for dynastic emergencies. It was, in effect, my personal war chest. My phone buzzed. It was the investigator. That was fast. "You're not going to believe this, Mrs. Vance," he said. His voice hurried. "I don't need until noon. Camilla Russo isn't a brand strategist. She's not even a good amateur. She's a professional, a very high-end sugar baby with a long file." I gripped the pen in my hand. "Go on." "She's done this twice before. 2 different tech CEOs in Silicon Valley. She targets executives she perceives as new money, or, in this case, insecure money. Gets them to lavish her with gifts, but her real angle is company stock or, it looks like here, company funds." He emailed me the file as we spoke. I opened it. Bank statements. Wire transfers. "I'm seeing regular wires," he said, moving from an Aurelian Capital Operations account directly to her personal LLC. "We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 6 months, coded as consulting fees." I stopped breathing for a second. The room became very still. Julian was not just having an affair. He was being methodically conned by a professional grifter, and he was so stupid, so desperate to feel powerful, that he was using company money, not even his own offshore accounts, but the company's operating funds to pay her. This was not just adultery. This was not just a moral failing. This was corporate malfeasance. This was theft. This was an SEC violation. I looked at Julian's pathetic divorce offer on my desk. I looked at the wire transfers on my screen. The original plan was simple expose his infidelity, trigger the morality clause, take the company, and divorce him. A new plan formed, cold and sharp and far more brutal. This was no longer a divorce. This was a hostile takeover, and I was not just going to take his company. I was going to dismantle his entire life. I spent the next 48 hours playing the role I was born to play, and the one he expected the broken wife. I moved into the guest suite at the far end of the penthouse, locking the door. I had Mrs. Davis bring me trays of food that I left untouched in the hallway. When Julian knocked, I told him to go away, my voice thick with manufactured sobs. He let me grieve for 1 day. By the second, his patience was gone. "Ilara, for God's sake," he yelled through the door. "What did your lawyer say he works for me, too? You know, just sign the damn papers. Stop being so dramatic. It's pathetic." I opened the door, wearing a silk robe, my hair uncombed, my eyes red. I had been practicing the look. I whispered, letting my voice crack. "I don't know what I'm going to do without you. Julian, 12 years. I gave you everything. I need time to think." His expression was one of profound, utter contempt. He saw weakness. He saw a pathetic, dependent woman clinging to the wreckage. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see. You don't have time, he snapped. I have things in motion, things you wouldn't understand. Don't make this difficult. He was right. He did have things in motion. Julian, feeling superior and victorious, was already celebrating. He was spending money he did not have. He needed cash. Fast. He needed it to shower Camilla with the kind of vulgar wealth she demanded, and he needed it to pay the generous settlement he thought would buy my silence. His entire life was built on the foundation of the trust, and he was suddenly realizing he could not access a dime of it without my signature. He became desperate. On the third morning, he burst into the guest room without knocking. I was reading by the window, feigning shock. He was vibrating with a manic energy, waving a new stack of documents. Right, he said, not even bothering with pleasantries. Forget the divorce papers for a second. This is urgent. This is business. He threw the new binder onto the bed. I'm making a deal. A big one. Aurelian is acquiring a new tech firm. A merger. It's a game changer. I knew this was coming. Marcus had flagged the potential target last week. It was a disastrously risky move, a company drowning in debt that Julian thought he could flip. It was pure hubris. His father would have destroyed him for even suggesting it. I don't understand, Julian. What does this have to do with me? I asked, wiping a non-existent tear from my eye. It has everything to do with you, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. To fund the acquisition, I need to leverage the company's assets. The board is on board, but to secure the financing, I need to use the trust's shares as collateral. He pointed at the document. I need you to sign. As trustee, it's just a rubber stamp. A formality. This was it. The second fatal mistake. He was so blinded by his new girlfriend and his new deal that he was about to hand me the murder weapon. I looked at the documents. I looked at his impatient, arrogant face. I let my shoulders slump in defeat. A rubber stamp, I repeated dully. Like me. Exactly, he said, too excited to even register the insult. Now, sign it. I looked at him and let my lip tremble. Okay, I whispered. Julian froze. He stared at me. He had come in prepared for a war, for hysterics, for a negotiation. He was completely disarmed by my immediate surrender. He almost looked confused. Then, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He had finally broken me. He had won. Good, he said, patting my shoulder. You're finally being smart. Ilara, see, this is all for the best. I picked up the expensive pen from his briefcase. Just one thing. His face darkened instantly. What now? My lawyer, I stammered. He insisted. He said it was for my protection, a small addition, a rider. He said it was standard to protect the trust from any liability, in case the deal goes badly. I slid a single piece of paper toward him. It had been drafted by Marcus Thorne at 3 a.m. It was dense, boring, and filled with mind-numbing legal jargon about indemnification and fiduciary responsibility. Julian, in his rush to victory, did exactly what I knew he would do. He did not read it. He skimmed it. He saw the words liability and protect the trust and nodded impatiently. Fine, fine. Whatever your timid little lawyer wants, attach it. Just sign the main page. I obediently attached the rider to the back of the signature packet. I signed my name, Ilara Vance, trustee, on the main document. I signed away 51% of Aurelian capital as collateral for his idiotic, company-killing gamble. He snatched the papers from me before the ink was even dry. There, he said, straightening his tie. That wasn't so hard, was it? He left the room without another word, already dialing his bankers, triumphant. He never read the fine print. He never saw the single sentence Marcus had buried in the third paragraph of the rider. The clause stated that the trustee's signature could be revoked and the entire transaction voided at the trustee's sole discretion within the next 48 hours if credible evidence of financial malfeasance by the CEO is discovered. Julian had just started the clock, and I already had the evidence. I gave Julian 24 hours. 24 hours to savor his victory, to finalize his catastrophic merger, to feel the imaginary crown settling on his head. He spent the entire day in his office, barking orders. I spent the day in mine, coordinating the attack. He had booked a table for two at Le Celeste, the most obnoxiously exclusive restaurant in the city, for that evening. He was celebrating. He was, for the first time, spending the money he believed he now controlled. I, on the other hand, was watching, not from the restaurant, but from my office, via a secure video feed. The investigator I had on retainer was efficient. He had a contact in the kitchen who had placed a small, discreet camera giving me a perfect view of Julian's celebratory table. He and Camilla arrived at 8 o'clock, laughing. She was wearing a diamond bracelet I had never seen before bought. No doubt, with the new line of credit he had foolishly opened. They ordered the most expensive champagne. They toasted. Julian leaned in and kissed her, a long, proprietary kiss in full view of the restaurant. He was daring the world to challenge him. At 8:01, as they were laughing at some shared joke, I made the call. Now. The first strike hit the internet. The Financial Wire, a blog so ruthless it had toppled hedge funds, published their lead story. I had fed it to them through Marcus, an anonymous, untraceable leak of pure, damning data. The title was perfect: Aurelian Capital's Beneficiary Problem. I watched on my laptop as the article I already knew by heart went live. It was a masterpiece of corporate evisceration. It detailed, line by line, the wire transfers. Over $600,000 moved from Aurelian's primary operating account money meant for salaries and overhead into a shell LLC named CR Strategies. The article then pivoted, asking who this brilliant strategist was. It revealed, with cold precision, that Camilla Russo had no corporate footprint, no business degree, no history as a strategist of any kind. It did, however, provide a very clear history of her associations with two other high-profile executives in Silicon Valley, both of whom, the article noted, had faced shareholder lawsuits for misappropriation of funds shortly after retaining Mr. Russo's services. It was not just an accusation. It was a conviction, complete with bank routing numbers. On my video feed, I saw Julian's phone, resting on the tablecloth, begin to vibrate. A single text. He ignored it. It vibrated again, and again. Then it lit up with a call. He picked it up, his face a mask of annoyance. What? I could not hear the voice on the other end, but I saw Julian's posture change. He sat bolt upright, the blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale sheen under the restaurant's warm lighting. "That's a lie," he stammered. "It's slander. It's my—" He was cut off. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it in disbelief. It immediately rang again. A different name. A board member. "What is it, Julian?" Camilla asked, her smile fading. "Is something wrong with the deal?" "Shut up," he hissed, rejecting the call. His phone instantly exploded. A flood of alerts texts, emails, calls all coming in at once. The Wire article had been picked up by every other major financial news outlet. The firestorm had begun. Camilla, sensing the shift, pulled out her own phone. "Julian, you're scaring me. What is happening?" She found the article. I watched her face as she read. She was not a fool. She was a predator. And she knew the look of a trap when she was in one. She recognized her own name. She recognized the names of the men from Palo Alto. "Julian," she whispered, her voice sharp with real panic. "What is this?" "They know. They know about the account. You told me you were the CEO. You told me it was your money." "It is my money," he shouted. Several tables turned to look. He lowered his voice to a desperate, ragged hiss. "How did they find this? How did they know?" You used the operations account," Camilla said, her eyes wide with terror. She was not a partner. She was an accomplice, and she had just been publicly named. Oh my God, Julian, you idiot! You tied me to it. As they began to argue, a waiter approached their table, holding a small, jet-black box tied with a simple satin ribbon. He moved with serene grace, ignoring the chaos. "Excuse me," the waiter said, addressing Camilla directly. "This was delivered for you, Ms. Russo." Julian was too busy frantically texting his lawyer to even notice. Camilla, bewildered, took the box. She opened it. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a first-class, one-way ticket on Emirates, departing from JFK at 11 o'clock that night. The destination was Dubai. The investigator's report had mentioned she had another potential patron there, one she was keeping in reserve. Beside the ticket was a cashier's check for $50,000, and beneath that, a single, thick, cream-colored note card. My initials, E.V., were embossed at the top. The note was simple. "Thank you for your service. Don't ever come back to New York." Camilla stared at the box. Her breathing was shallow. She looked at the check. She looked at the ticket. She looked up at Julian, who was now standing, pacing beside the table, pulling at his hair and muttering to himself. He was a cornered animal. Then, Camilla looked up. She looked directly at the security camera. She could not see me, but I saw her. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, hard, professional calculation. She finally understood. She knew who had sent the box. She knew who had leaked the story. She knew who held the real power. It was not the loud, arrogant man having a breakdown by the table. It was the quiet, humiliated wife. She snapped the box shut. She slid it into her purse. She stood up, straightened her new dress, and without a single word to Julian, she walked out of the restaurant and out of his life. He did not even notice she was gone. I was in my car, not the Maybach, but my own private sedan, when Julian stumbled into the penthouse at 4 a.m. He had probably spent the night alternately pleading with his lawyers and drowning himself in scotch. I, on the other hand, had slept for a solid 6 hours. At 7:50 a.m., I walked into the lobby of the Aurelian Capitol building. I was not alone. Marcus Thorne was on my right. On my left were 2 senior litigators from his firm, specialists in corporate and securities law. We bypassed the front desk and took the private elevator to the 40th floor. The emergency board meeting had been called for 8 a.m. We stood outside the heavy oak doors. I could already hear Julian's voice, strained and high-pitched. He was in full-blown panic. "It's a lie, a complete fabrication," he was shouting. I motioned for my team to wait. I wanted to hear this. "My wife is emotionally unstable. We are in the middle of a contentious divorce. She is a scorned woman, and she is fabricating these baseless accusations to gain leverage in our settlement. It's a personal vendetta." So, one of the older board members, Arthur Peterson, spoke. "Julian, the routing numbers in that article, they look authentic." "They're fake," Julian shrieked. "She's trying to tank the company to hurt me. It's slander." I chose that moment. I pushed the heavy door open. The boardroom went silent. 12 of the most powerful men in New York, the entire board of Aurelian Capital, turned to look at me. Julian, who had been pacing wildly at the head of the table, froze. His face, already pale and puffy, turned a blotchy red. He looked like a cornered animal. I walked silently, my heels clicking on the marble, to the empty seat at the far end of the table, the one his father used to occupy. Marcus and my lawyers took up positions against the wall behind me. "Ilara," Julian snarled, his voice a low growl. "You have no right to be here. This is a closed meeting." I ignored him. I placed my leather portfolio on the gleaming mahogany table and looked at the anxious faces staring back at me. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and carried easily across the room. "Julian is mistaken. I am, in fact, the only reason we are here. I believe you are discussing my 51%. The silence was deafening. Now, I continued, opening my portfolio, you have all seen the Wire article. It is, of course, entirely true. You lying bitch, Julian screamed. What you have not seen, I said, ignoring his outburst as my team began to distribute slim, gray folders to each board member, is the rest of it. I waited for them all to open the folders. The $600,000 sent to Ms. Russo's shell company was just the appetizer. If you will turn to Exhibit A, you will see the financials for 3 other special projects Julian approved over the last 18 months, all funded from the operations account. A failed crypto venture in Miami, a documentary film about his own life, a seed investment in a tequila brand that does not exist, totaling an additional $9 million in corporate malfeasance. A collective gasp went around the room. These men were not fools, they were investors, and I had just shown them the books. This, I said, is why I called this meeting. She's lying, Julian insisted, but the fight was gone from his voice. The documents are forged. They are not, Marcus Thorne said, speaking for the first time. His voice, dry and authoritative, commanded respect. We have the full audit. It's all there. I turned my attention to the board, which brings me to the merger. Yesterday, in a desperate attempt to cover these losses, Julian pushed through a highly volatile acquisition. He did so by leveraging the company's assets specifically, the trust's controlling shares. He did it with my signature. Arthur Peterson looked up, his face grim. We saw the approval. Ilara, you signed off. I did, I agreed, and I am deeply grateful he acted so quickly because it gave me the opening I needed. I slid a single sheet of paper to the center of the table. As of 8:03 a.m. this morning, pursuant to the 48-hour revocation rider attached to the financing agreement, the rider he was in too much of a hurry to read my signature is withdrawn. The collateral is pulled. The deal is dead. I had just saved the company from catastrophic financial hemorrhage. Julian looked like he was going to be sick. He had lost. But Peterson, his old family friend, was still trying to find a way out for him. This is a disaster, Julian. Unconscionable. But Ilara. He looked at me, his expression almost pitying. This is a family matter, a horrifying, public family matter. But you are still his wife. The bylaws are clear. You cannot vote against your own husband in a matter of company leadership. It is a fundamental conflict of interest. Julian's head snapped up. He saw his lifeline. He's right, he shouted, a wild, desperate hope in his eyes. She's my wife. Her shares don't count. She can't vote me out. It's a conflict. I looked at Peterson. I almost smiled. He had just set me up for the final move. An excellent point, Arthur. A conflict of interest is a very serious thing. I let the silence hang for a beat. I turned my gaze from the board members, one by one, until it rested on my husband. That is precisely why I am here. Gentlemen, as the sole trustee of the Vance Family Trust, I am here to formally invoke Article 7B of the last will and testament of Theodore Vance. A deep, profound silence fell over the boardroom. The 12 board members looked from me to Julian and then to Marcus Thorne, who was standing behind me, his face a perfectly neutral mask. Even he, as part of our plan, allowed a flicker of tension to show, as if he himself were unsure what would happen next. The air was so thick I could barely breathe. Julian, however, saw the conflict of interest argument as a victory. He saw my invocation of the will as a desperate, emotional ploy. He let out a short, barking laugh. It was a terrible, strained sound. Article 7B, he scoffed, straightening his suit jacket, regaining his false bravado. That's the infidelity clause. I've read it. You're going to divorce me. Fine, good. Get it over with. It doesn't change anything in this room. It just means we split the assets. It doesn't give you the right to vote. He was still playing chess, unaware the board had been flipped over. I shook my head, a slow, almost pitying gesture. You still don't read, do you, Julian? You never read the fine print. You hear what you want to hear, you skim the rest, and you let your lawyers tell you what you want to believe. I looked away from him, addressing the board once more. They were my audience. They were the jury. Article 7B is not just an infidelity clause, I explained, my voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. My father-in-law was far more intelligent than that. He knew simple infidelity was common. What he despised, what he would not tolerate, was public disgrace. The clause, I continued, specifically cites an act of flagrant infidelity or public malfeasance that brings demonstrable harm to the family name. I let those words sink in. The Golden Heart's Gala 2 nights ago, I said, my voice dropping. When you arrived, Mr. Vance, with your mistress on your arm, when you paraded her in front of your colleagues, your investors, and the entire New York press corps, when you draped my family's heirloom, Le Diamant Soleil, around her neck for every photographer to capture. I looked directly at Julian, whose face had gone very, very still. That was not a private indiscretion. Julian, that was a public execution of the Vance family's reputation, a reputation Theodore spent 50 years building. You, in one night of pathetic, egotistical peacocking, violated the morality clause of his trust. Julian's face was ashen. The blotchy red was gone, replaced by a waxy gray pallor. He was finally, truly, afraid. So what? He stammered, looking around the table for support. No one would meet his eye. What does that mean? The trust. It's frozen. We split it. I lose half. What? I waited. I let him founder in the silence, his own pathetic questions echoing in the room. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. No, Julian, we don't split it. You don't lose half. I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the mahogany table. According to your father's will, a violation of this specific article, this one, singular violation is considered an act of ultimate betrayal against the family legacy, and it triggers the penalty codicil. Marcus Thorne, on cue, stepped forward and placed a single bound document in front of Arthur Peterson. It was the original will. What penalty? Julian whispered. He could not seem to form the words. I spoke for him. The penalty codicil states that the violating beneficiary, that is you, Julian, is to be considered, in the eyes of the law and the trust, as having predeceased the testator. In simpler terms, you are immediately and permanently disinherited. Julian's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of his chair to steady himself. No, he breathed. No, he wouldn't. He did, I said. And all assets, properties, and shares held within the Vance family trust, including and not limited to the full 51% controlling stake in Aurelian Capital, are to vest permanently, immediately, and irrevocably with the sole trustee. I let my eyes travel around the table, landing on each and every board member. That, I concluded, is me. Julian stared, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked at me, then at Marcus, then around the table at the 12 men who had, just 10 minutes ago, been his subordinates. You can't, he finally whispered. It was a pathetic, broken sound. Then the rage hit him. You can't. That's my money, my inheritance. My father would never. He would never do that to me. He wouldn't. Marcus Thorne, who had been silent for so long, finally stepped forward. His voice was not loud, but it silenced Julian's tirade instantly. I drafted the will to Mr. Theodore Vance's exact specifications. Julian, Marcus said, his disappointment palpable. He loved you, but he was not blind. He knew your character. He knew your weaknesses. He said you would one day risk his entire legacy for a fast thrill or a pretty face. He did this to protect the company. He did this to protect his life's work. From you." Julian just shook his head, muttering, "No, no, no," over and over. I, however, was now the majority shareholder. The conflict of interest Arthur Peterson had so helpfully raised was now moot. I was no longer a conflicted wife. I was the controlling owner. I pulled my chair forward. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative. The room snapped to attention. "Now that the ownership of the controlling 51% is settled, we have business to attend to. I, as the majority shareholder of Aurelian Capital, make my first motion." I looked down the table, past the stunned faces, and met the shattered, hollow eyes of my husband. "I move for a vote of no confidence in CEO Julian Vance, citing gross corporate malfeasance, misappropriation of funds, and catastrophic endangerment of the company's financial stability. The vote is for his immediate termination, effective immediately." I raised my hand. "I vote yes." Arthur Peterson was the first to speak. He looked at Julian with profound disgust. "The evidence is undeniable. He nearly bankrupted us for that woman, and his own ego. I vote yes." One by one, the dominoes fell. Yes. Yes. I. It was unanimous. 12 votes against 1. Julian's 51% was now my 51%, and his 49% minority stake was now worthless, trapped in a company he no longer controlled. "The motion passes," I said into the stunned silence. "Mr. Vance is terminated, effective immediately." I pressed the intercom button on the console in front of me. "Security to the 40th floor boardroom, immediately. We have an unauthorized individual to be removed." You. Julian sputtered. He was beyond rage. He was in a state of total collapse. "You did this. This was you. All of it." The heavy oak doors opened, and 2 uniformed security guards, men who had saluted Julian just that morning, entered the room. They looked at me, awaiting orders. "Mr. Vance is no longer an employee of this company," I said calmly. "Please escort him from the building. He is not to take anything with him. His personal effects will be forwarded." "Yes, Mrs. Vance." They moved toward him. That is when he completely unraveled. "No," he screamed, backing away, knocking over his chair. "Get your hands off me. This is my company, my building." The guards were professional. They each took an arm. Julian began to fight, to twist, but he was weak, pathetic. As they dragged him, struggling, toward the door, he turned his head, his face purple with apoplectic rage, and bellowed one last, desperate threat at me. "You won't get another cent. You hear me? Not 1 cent of my personal money. My private accounts, I'll freeze everything. I'll hide it. You'll never find it. You'll be sorry." He was halfway out the door, his voice echoing in the hallway. I waited until they had him at the elevator bank. Then I spoke, my voice sweet, almost conversational. "What personal money?" "Julian." He stopped struggling. He turned to look at me. "Do you mean the accounts in Switzerland?" I asked, tilting my head. "The ones at Credit Suisse, account number ending in 4288. Or do you mean the shell corporation in the Caymans?" "Vance Future Holdings. The one you thought was so clever." His face went from purple to a shade of white I had never seen on a living person. He was completely, utterly still. I smiled. "You seem to have forgotten about the family contingency fund." "Julian, the account your father left me for dynastic emergencies." I decided this qualified. I stood up and walked toward him, stopping just inside the boardroom. "For the last 6 months, that fund has been paying for a full, international forensic audit of every dollar you have ever hidden, every account you have ever opened, and every tax you have ever evaded." I let him absorb that. I let him understand that I had not just caught up to him, I had been ahead of him for months. "The evidence packets are quite thorough," I added, straightening the cuff of my blouse. "The IRS and the SEC both received their copies about an hour ago. I imagine they are very, very eager to speak with you about offshore tax evasion and securities fraud." Julian Vance made a small, choking sound. The fight was gone. The man was gone. All that was left was a hollow shell. The guards, seeing he was no longer resisting, pulled him into the elevator. The doors slid shut, and he was gone. 2 weeks had passed. The Park Avenue penthouse was no longer my home. It was a museum of a life I was dismantling. The cavernous rooms, stripped of their art and furniture, echoed with the sound of packing tape. I was supervising the movers, watching them load the last of the crates. I had sold the apartment. It was never Julian's to begin with. It was, like everything else, an asset of the trust, and I was liquidating. I was signing the final manifest when the private elevator chimed. I turned, expecting the building manager. It was Julian. He looked like a ghost. In just 2 weeks, the arrogant, commanding man I had married had evaporated, replaced by this. He was gaunt, his skin a pale, sickly gray. His expensive suit hung on his thinner frame as if on a wire hanger. He was out on bail, a courtesy his high-priced criminal lawyers had managed while the SEC and IRS built their mountain of a case against him. He must have charmed or tricked the doorman into letting him up one last time. "Ilara," he said. His voice was a dry rasp, unfamiliar. He took a few unsteady steps into the empty foyer. "Ilara, please." He looked around at the bare walls, the stacks of boxes, the sheer finality of it. "I've lost everything. The company, the accounts, the house. It's all gone. They took my passport. Ilara, please, don't let them do this." I just looked at him. I had nothing left to say. He saw the silence on my face, and the last shred of his pride crumbled. He, Julian Vance, the man who believed he was a king, sank to his knees on the cold marble floor. "I love you," he whispered, the words choking him. "I swear, I always loved you. It was always you. Camila." She meant nothing. She was a mistake. A stupid, arrogant mistake. That's all. Please, Ilara, you control everything. You can stop this. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I'll pay it back. I need you." I looked down at the pathetic figure at my feet. For 12 years, I had dreaded his anger, his arrogance, his cold dismissal. Now, I felt nothing but a vast, cold pity. It was not hatred. Hatred is hot. This was the absolute zero of indifference. "The problem is, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, echoing slightly in the empty room. "You don't love me. You never did. You loved what I did for you. You loved the way I ran your homes, the way I managed your social life, the way I stabilized the legacy you were too reckless to protect. You loved my silence." I picked up the last small box from the table, the one with my personal effects. "You made a fatal mistake, Julian. You looked at that silence for 12 years, and you thought it was weakness. You thought it was submission. You never, not once, realized that my silence was observation." He shook his head, tears of self-pity welling in his eyes. He fumbled inside his crumpled suit jacket, his hand searching for something. "You took it all," he choked out. "Everything. The money, the company, my father's legacy. But you forgot one thing. You missed one thing." He pulled out a heavy, silver-framed photograph. It was from our wedding day, 12 years ago. The two of us, smiling on the steps of the church, looking impossibly young and, for a moment, happy. "The memories," he said, his voice trembling with a pathetic, hollow triumph. "Our memories. You can't take away the good memories. Ilara, you can't take that." He held it up to me like a shield, an offering. I took the heavy frame from his hand. I looked at the smiling faces, the young woman who thought she could fix him, the young man who only saw a suitable accessory. It felt like looking at two strangers. I held his gaze. Then, I turned and dropped the photograph, frame and all, into the large cardboard trash bin the movers had set by the door. The glass shattered with a sharp, final crack. Julian stared at the bin, his mouth open, a small, wounded sound escaping his throat. "You're right, Julian," I said, turning back to him. He was still on his knees, a broken man on a marble floor. "I can't take your memories." I picked up my purse and walked toward the elevator. "But I can ensure that you will have plenty of time in prison to reflect on every single one of them." I stepped into the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby, and as the polished steel doors slid shut, sealing him in the tomb he had built for himself, I did not look back. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to connect with you all, so please comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories and like this video. And finally, if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.